Long before the devastation of World War II etched the name Auschwitz into the soul of humanity, before the world recoiled in horror at what unchecked hatred could unleash, imagine a different beginning. A beginning where the Jewish people, long scattered, persecuted, and stateless, had carved out a home of their own, not in the Middle East, but in the very heart of Europe. Picture it, a nation built from centuries of longing and resilience. A land where synagogues rose beside government buildings, where Yiddish filled the streets alongside German or Polish, and where Jewish identity was not merely tolerated, but woven into the fabric of sovereignty. Now pause, and consider if this had truly happened, if such a nation had been recognized and protected with the full backing of the international order, how different might the course of history have been? Would the inferno of the Holocaust have been extinguished before it ever sparked? Would 6 million lives, grandparents, children, poets, scientists have been spared from the machinery of death? And beyond that haunting question, what would it mean for the trajectory of the 20th century itself? Would the global order have shifted? Would alliances have changed? Would conflict have found new paths or lost its momentum altogether? This is not a fantasy. It's a thought experiment grounded in real moments, real proposals, real turning points that could have gone another way. And today, we're diving headfirst into that alternate timeline. Welcome to Timelines Rewritten, a space where imagination isn't just play, it's a tool for peeling back the layers of the past and exploring the countless forks in the road that history could have taken. This isn't about rewriting history for fantasy's sake, it's about sharpening our understanding of it by asking bold, difficult questions. Today, we confront one such question. Haunting, yes, but also strangely full of potential and possibility. What if the Jewish people had successfully established a sovereign nation in Europe long before the horrors of the Holocaust, before Hitler, before the world was plunged into its darkest chapter? What if that homeland had been recognized, defended, and allowed to grow not in the deserts of the Middle East, but amid the patchwork of nations and empires that once ruled the European continent? This question isn't just about a place on the map. It's about something far deeper: identity, who belongs where, and who decides. It's about power, who gets to wield it, and who is always asking for permission. It's about survival, not just in the face of oppression, but in the assertion of culture, language, and belief. And ultimately, it's about transformation, how one seemingly small divergence might have rewritten the political, social, and even moral trajectory of the world. From the diplomatic salons of Vienna, where whispers of Jewish autonomy echoed in the ears of empire, to the determined steps of Theodor Herzl, walking with a vision that defied centuries of exile. There were moments, real moments, when the world stood at a precipice, where a Jewish nation in Europe was not just possible, but almost real. But what if this time, that dream didn't vanish into archives and forgotten speeches? What if it came true, and everything else changed? Let's turn the clock back to 1903, a year that few today remember, but one that pulsed with possibility for a people long without a homeland. The setting: the Sixth Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. The mood: expectant, tense. Delegates from across Europe had gathered to chart the course of a nascent movement, the dream of a Jewish state. But no one could have anticipated what was about to unfold. Then came the shock. Theodor Herzl, the charismatic founder of modern political Zionism, stepped forward with a proposal that would electrify and divide the room. He suggested something radical, unorthodox. Uganda. Not Palestine. Not the ancient homeland of biblical memory, but British East Africa, a swath of land far removed from Jerusalem, yet offered by none other than the British Empire itself. It was real. It was on paper. And it was strategic. Herzl called it a temporary refuge, a way station for Jews fleeing the escalating horrors of pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe. For some, it was betrayal. For others, a lifeline. Now, let's shift the lens. What if Herzl had been just a bit more persuasive? What if fear outweighed nostalgia, and the Congress, wary of growing anti-Semitism and aching for safety, voted yes? Imagine tens of thousands of European Jews resettling in East Africa under the protective wing of the British Empire. Imagine synagogues rising beside the savannah, Hebrew schools planted among the coffee fields. Imagine a Jewish protectorate taking root, not as myth, but as policy, backed by London, governed by Jews, and recognized by the world. Such a state, however distant from Zion, could have transformed the geopolitical landscape of the early 20th century. It could have served as a buffer against genocide, a nucleus of political power, and a base for global Jewish advocacy. Now ask yourself, if such a nation had existed, recognized, armed, perhaps even allied with Britain and France, would Hitler's hateful vision have found such fertile ground? Would the Nazis have been able to so easily paint Jews as powerless parasites, when an entire nation of Jews stood tall, proud, self-governing, and globally respected? Would the final solution have ever taken form, if there had already been a final escape? This isn't science fiction. It was debated. It was considered. It nearly happened. And history, as we know it, could have unraveled in a vastly different direction. Now, shift your gaze eastward to the heart of Central Europe, to a region that once pulsed with the footsteps of poets, rabbis, revolutionaries, and dreamers. Galicia, a territory that today is split between Poland and Ukraine, but at the dawn of the 20th century, it was something else entirely. It was a cultural mosaic nestled within the sprawling patchwork of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And within that mosaic, one of the largest, most vibrant Jewish communities in Europe. By the late 1800s, Galicia's Jewish population was not only vast, it was intellectually alive. Cities like Lemberg, now Lviv, weren't just population centers, they were cradles of Jewish thought, where Hasidic traditions clashed and coexisted with secular, socialist, and Zionist ideas. Jews filled the professions, the markets, the press, and even the imperial bureaucracy. And amidst this ferment, a bold idea began to take shape. What if the Jews of Galicia could gain autonomy? Not independence, not secession, but a formal, recognized status as a semi-autonomous province within the empire, governed by Jewish councils, educated in Hebrew and Yiddish, represented in Vienna, protected by imperial law, a Jewish homeland not carved out of ancient deserts, but growing in the fertile soil of European modernity. And it wasn't just a pipe dream. Jewish leaders made appeals. Some Austro-Hungarian officials, desperate to manage the empire's rising ethnic tensions, listened. With Slavic nationalism on the rise and the empire under pressure from every side, granting Jewish autonomy could have been a strategic compromise, a way to secure loyalty and maintain internal balance. So imagine a Galician province, proudly Jewish in culture, language, and administration. Lemberg, its capital, transforming into a dazzling center of Jewish life. Not just a city, but a symbol. A Vienna of the Jews, with theaters, universities, synagogues, and a parliamentary voice. In this version of history, Jewish children would grow up with citizenship and cultural pride. Jewish law would coexist with imperial law. Anti-Semitism wouldn't vanish, but it would face a counterweight. A recognized, empowered Jewish polity, alive within the very framework of the empire. But then comes the Great Rupture, World War I. Would this Jewish province have survived the trenches, the famine, the collapse of the Habsburgs? Would it have been absorbed by new nations, torn apart in post-war treaties, or defended as a beacon of pluralism in a newly drawn Europe? Or perhaps, would it have become a target? An isolated cultural jewel, surrounded by rising nationalism, anti-Semitism, and the long shadows of fascism to come. Still, even in war, autonomy matters. Identity matters. A Jewish Galicia could have offered a bulwark, a refuge, or a rallying point, one that might have rewritten the Jewish experience of the 20th century. Because history shows us, when identity is paired with recognized power, the story often unfolds very differently. Now, let's raise the stakes. Let's step beyond what could have been an isolated settlement or a patch of cultural autonomy. Let's imagine a fully realized Jewish nation. Not in 1948, but decades earlier. It's 1910. Somewhere in Europe, or perhaps in East Africa, a Jewish state exists. Not in exile, not in theory, but in fact. It has a government, a flag, a standing army. It is recognized by the international community, backed perhaps by Britain, tolerated by empires, and respected, grudgingly or not, by its neighbors. Now the ripple effects begin. Across Tsarist Russia, where pogroms rage and Jews are branded as outsiders, a lifeline emerges. In Germany and France, where anti-Semitism simmers under the surface of enlightenment and nationalism, Jews now have a real choice. Do they stay and struggle for rights, or migrate early to a state that welcomes them as citizens, not suspects? Imagine this exodus, not one of desperation, but of purpose. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of Jews moving before the darkest decades unfold. Not to flee a burning Europe, but to build something powerful and sovereign. A demographic shift of immense proportions. Would Jewish communities in Berlin and Warsaw shrink? Yes. But in their place rises a new center of Jewish life, independent, self-defending, and diplomatically active. Then comes the First World War. Would this young Jewish nation join the Allies? Would it raise a battalion, perhaps even a full army corps, to fight alongside Britain and France? And if it did, how would the post-war map be redrawn? Would this state earn a seat at Versailles, perhaps even influence the crafting of the New World Order? A Jewish voice at the table of nations, decades before the horrors of the Holocaust ever unfold. But here's where the timeline truly fractures. Without a stateless Jewish population, without scattered and vulnerable communities to scapegoat, does Hitler ever rise? The Nazis' toxic propaganda fed on the idea of Jewish infiltration, disloyalty, and power without roots. But what if that narrative collapses? If Jews have a state, a military, and a visible, accountable foreign policy? Then the central myth of a Jewish conspiracy loses its potency. Would fascism still fester in Europe? Almost certainly. But without Jews as the convenient enemy, would its fire catch the same way? And what of the Middle East? With a Jewish homeland already established elsewhere, there is no need for the Balfour Declaration, no vague promise made by Britain to secure Zionist support during World War I. No British mandate in Palestine. No mass migration to what was then a predominantly Arab land. Jerusalem, still sacred, still symbolic, might remain an Arab-majority city, untouched by the storms of Zionism and resistance. Would conflict still arise? Possibly. But it would play out along entirely different lines, less about land promised to two peoples, and more about broader colonial legacies. We might never see the displacement of 1948. We might never hear the phrase Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The balance of power in the Middle East, the very borders of modern nations, all of it might have shifted, shaped by this single, seismic change. The early birth of a Jewish nation. Now, we turn the question over to you. What do you think the world might have looked like if a Jewish nation had existed before the Holocaust? Would it have been a refuge, saving millions from the gas chambers of Europe? Or would it have sparked new tensions, redrawing alliances, and igniting conflicts we can only begin to imagine? History is filled with crossroads, and this one, perhaps more than most, forces us to consider the weight of what could have been. So, tell us, which scenario feels the most plausible to you? Was the Uganda plan the real missed opportunity, a strange but viable safe haven backed by the British Empire? Or was Galicia, a deeply rooted cultural heartland within Europe, the more natural path to autonomy? Maybe you have an entirely different vision. One history never even came close to realizing. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from history buffs, speculative thinkers, and curious minds alike. And if this exploration challenged your understanding of the past, if it made you pause, reflect, or reimagine, then give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe for more alternate timelines, speculative history, and deep dives into the what ifs that continue to shape our world. Because here, at Timelines Rewritten, don't just ask questions. We explore the worlds that never were, but maybe could have been. History is not just a sequence of dates and wars, it's a landscape of roads not taken, choices not made, and chances forever lost. And few what ifs echo as hauntingly as this one. The Holocaust, our most devastating modern tragedy, remains a scar on human history. But what if things had unfolded differently? What if the world had made room for a Jewish homeland before the shadows fell over Europe? Imagine not only survival, but dignity. Imagine a people not endlessly displaced, but rooted. Not voiceless, but politically present. Not hunted, but holding power. Would our concept of identity, nationalism, and justice look different today? Of course, even alternate paths come with unknowns. Would new alliances have shifted old hatreds? Would peace have prevailed? Or would new conflicts have risen in place of old ones? That's the burden and the beauty of alternate history. It doesn't give us easy answers, but it challenges us to think, not just about what happened, but what could have and what still might. Thank you for joining us today on Timelines Rewritten, where curiosity is your compass, and every possibility offers a new truth. If this journey stirred your imagination, hit subscribe and become part of a community that believes history isn't just remembered, it's reimagined. Because here, we don't just study the past, we rewrite its timeline, together.